In today's video, we are going to be wrapping up the three-part mini-series that I have been doing discussing the use and alleged abuse of psychiatric medicine within the Catholic organization Opus Dei. If this is the first video of mine that you have clicked on, first of all, hi, my name is Beck Griffin, and this is the Deep Dive Project, which is my venture in independent citizen journalism and research. But you may be unaware that there are two videos preceding the video that you are watching right now that are also discussing this subject and provide additional context. So I would highly recommend that you check those out either before or after you watch this video. Because this is the last video in this little mini-series, I want to take a moment and discuss why I have felt it was important to spend some time focusing on this particular issue. I have been down this Opus Dei rabbit hole now for a number of years, but one of the things that has remained consistent throughout my time researching this organization have been stories and rumors about experiences that people have had within this organization, specifically involving the use of psychiatric medicine. And I don't think, in my opinion, that that is accidental. And I also believe that by looking at these experiences and listening to what people have to say, we can deduce quite a bit about this organization, what the reality of life is like for the members inside, and we can start to tease apart the fact versus the hagiographical fiction that this organization has continued to promote, even as more and more people have come out declaring that they experienced things within this organization that were incredibly harmful. And so I think that this whole psychiatric medicine element gives us a good doorway, a good starting point for researching this organization and trying to understand the impact that it has on people and why better. And so that is why I have devoted this time. It has also given me an opportunity to present the testimonies of former members, which is something that I am consistently trying to do. I have tried to make sure that my research is victim, survivor informed and led as much as possible. That's why I have interviewed these people. I have spent hours talking to these people, trying to understand their experience and the impact that it had on them better. And I think it's important for me to try to bring that to everyone here as much as I possibly can, because it is incredibly impactful. And I don't really think that you can sit and listen to these stories and these experiences and come away with any feeling other than that this entire situation with this organization deserves a much more critical look than it has historically received. And we can only hope and pray that that is going to be beginning to change more and more as time goes forward. But nothing will change, for sure. Nothing will change if we are not discussing these issues, if we are not elevating the voices of people who have been through these systems and are attempting to raise the alarm. If we want to know how to move forward in a better and more equitable world, we have to take on board the perspectives and the experiences of people who have been through really difficult situations, even when it is really, really difficult to listen to, as I know that it is. There's so much about this organization in particular that challenges people on so many different levels. It challenges people, and it challenges the cognitive dissonance that we can sort of unknowingly begin assimilating into our lives without even realizing that it's there. And it's another really important thing that I want to challenge. And so that is why I have spent this time. And I hope that you can take something from these stories and experiences and the research that I am presenting, even if it is nothing more than a little bit more self-awareness for yourself. So with that said, let me go ahead and pull up my browser here and we will get into the first article. I am going to be quoting from myself. This is an article that I wrote on my Substack, Beck Griffin and the Deep Dive Project, which you can go and subscribe to for free if you would like to support me, and I sincerely appreciate everybody who has. This is part of a series of articles that I wrote over on my Substack that you can go and read, specifically discussing this Opus Dei and abuse of psychiatric medicine, or what I've big on referring to as APM issue. And I did some research into this element, this interesting use of modalities that are supposed to be used to help people, instead being turned to controlling them. And so I want to share this with you, and it's going to be where we're going to start our conversation for today. So this particular article, the headline I chose is "It's About Control, Opus Dei and Psychiatric Medicine." And I have a subheading here that reads, "Psychiatry is the only subspecialty of medicine in which a causal pronouncement by practitioners can strip individuals of their humanity, dignity, respect, and even liberty. It is a little wonder, therefore, that individuals or governments with ulterior motives would strive to use psychiatry for their own ends." That is a quote from Charles C. Dyke, MD, MPH. The question looming large in my mind is why? In the last 3 parts of this journalistic inquiry, my series of articles into the alleged use of psychiatric medicine to suppress the wills of the members of this conservative organization, Opus Dei, conservative cult, Opus Dei, if you like, I have attempted to establish some of the who, what, when, and where for what is, in my view, a gross systemic abuse of human rights. And that is just my opinion, of course, but there are reasons why I feel that way. And the why for it all is something that should be analyzed and addressed in some capacity. And that is what I'm going to attempt to do in this article and in this video here today. I have always thought that one of the better ways to wrap my mind around this issue is by looking to the history and etymology of the issue. The abuse of psychiatric medicine, or APM, as I am going to continue to refer to it, and the ways that it has been utilized in the past to provide insight. Make no mistake about it, APM is as much a weapon as it is a perversion. Despite the fact that, at least in Opus Dei's case, allegations of APM are a constant through line, literature specifically addressing the use of APM within cults or high control groups seems to be scarce, verging on essentially impossible to find. But if I widen my search criteria a bit, there are a wealth of results discussing APM within a political context. And I would like to note that politics exist within every strata of society, perhaps most especially in religion and government. A 2022 article published in Psychiatric News entitled "Misuse of Psychiatry" by Dr. Charles C. Dyke outlines examples of how APM has been misused throughout history. For example, in Governmental Chicanery, quote, "The Soviet Union's Society for Neurologists and Psychiatrists colluded with the state to misuse psychiatry by involuntarily institutionalizing political dissidents whom Soviet psychiatrists had diagnosed as suffering from sluggish schizophrenia. In 1983, the Soviet Society resigned from the World Psychiatric Association, WPA, to avoid certain expulsion from the WPA. Likewise, in the late 1990s, the WPA was alerted to allegations that the Chinese government was using the psychiatric establishment to punish members of Falun Gong, often through incarceration in forensic psychiatric hospitals, for their cultural and political beliefs that were at odds with the government's views. And of course, it is quite difficult to even pick at the history of APM without immediately coming up against its abuse within the context of racially based so-called social order. Quote, "Psychiatrists diagnosed African Americans to maintain the social order of enslavement and used Black patients to care for white patients. Of particular interest was Benjamin Rush, considered the father of American psychiatry, who believed that Black skin was a mild form of leprosy that he called negritude, which could be cured only by becoming white. An apprentice of his, Samuel Cartwright, coined the diagnosis drapetomania, a mental illness that caused Black slaves to flee captivity." Absolutely disgusting, and some very important historical context that I think we need to keep in mind. Another example of APM's use in service to society was in the 19th century case of Elizabeth Packard, a married woman who was committed to the Jacksonville Asylum in Illinois after being diagnosed with moral insanity for disobeying her husband and harboring alternate religious beliefs from her husband's, is a prime example. At the hospital, she encountered many other women who had suffered a similar fate, hospitalized for decades at the behest of their husbands and acquiescence of psychiatrists for questionable psychiatric reasons. Here, psychiatry was used for social control. That final phrase that psychiatry was used for social control strikes a chord and illuminates what may be the primary underlying why to this issue in Opus Dei. By looking through some of the historical uses of politically motivated APM, repressive control was always the goal. All the better when the society that is being controlled is so isolated and cut off from the rest of the world that business can be carried out quietly without notice. In a 7-part series published on Mercury, author Karen Desa exposes the alarming use of psychotropic drugs on youth in the California foster care system. Quote, with alarming frequency, foster and healthcare providers are turning to a risky but convenient remedy to control the behavior of thousands of troubled kids, numbing them with psychiatric drugs that are untested on and often not approved for children. A year of interviews with foster youth, caregivers, doctors, researchers, and legal advocates uncovered how the largest foster care system in the U.S. has grown dependent on quick fix, taxpayer funded, big profit pharmaceuticals, and how the state has done little to stop it. Of the tens of thousands of foster children placed on psychotropic drugs over the past 10 years, nearly 60% were prescribed an antipsychotic, the class of psychotropic medications with the highest risks. Hundreds of foster children 5 and younger have been prescribed psychotropics, although federal health officials say the drugs are not safe for the very young, and other states actively discourage the practice. Control and suppression. Be they political dissidents, racial minorities, or unruly women and children, the ultimate objectives have remained the same. Within Opus Dei, examples of control and suppression along with APM abound in the form of testimonies on its sites like odan.org, opuslibros.org, and r/Opus Dei Exposed. Some of them are very recent and some are older. In a series of letters submitted to opuslibros.org, one former member reflected on their experience being on the receiving end of the organization's strategy. This strategy had several different facets, which they described as the minimization of the issues they had raised, with an emphasis that any problems were personal rather than related to Opus Dei, a shifting of focus to the former member, and by which they were made to believe that they were the problem and that they needed to change, rest, and distance themselves from their concerns, exaggerated care and kindness intended to create a sense of belonging so that they would not question or assess their situation critically, which is essentially love bombing, and calculated conversations intended to manipulate their thoughts and feelings, including any doubts about their supposed vocation and the implication that they would be nothing without Opus Dei. This former member was expected to conform to the organization's expectations, suppressing their own conscience. I have always maintained that, from my point of view, Opus Dei weaponizes mental health care in a truly grotesque way. And a quick trip to the historical archives proved the organization has had ample examples to follow and no shortage of unscrupulous individuals who seemingly have no qualms about assisting Opus Dei in that effort. It isn't really difficult to understand why. Although Opus Dei has been on the receiving end of deserved and renewed scrutiny of late, the organization has hardly had a spotless record, and controversy has stalked Opus Dei from the very beginning. As a machine of sorts that has continued to trundle along its trajectory of re-Christianization, carrying out a mission that came ostensibly from heaven itself, anyone resisting or questioning that simply will not do. And Opus Dei may be able to do nothing to stop the speculations and opinings of yours truly, but on their own turf, it is a decidedly different state of affairs. So I wanted to provide some historical context for the use of psychiatric medicine in situations that were clearly unethical and abuse of human rights. And these are just like a tiny little smattering of examples. You can go and dig into this more yourself if you are interested. The rabbit hole goes deep on this issue, and it is something that crops up pretty consistently throughout recorded history, which I think is another reason why it's really, really important to be aware of the fact that this kind of issue exists. I want to also point out that this is not me taking an issue with modern psychology or psychiatric medicine, because says, while clearly the history of these modalities are problematic, it is undeniable that they have also resulted in a lot of care and aid being made available to people who really genuinely do need it. Mental illness is very, very, very real. But, I think we can hold two things to be true at the same time. And in this case, it is very possible to hold that psychiatric medicine and psychology and mental health support are very, very important. And there are aspects of the history and development of these modalities that is very, very problematic and have been used to suppress and abuse people. And I think we have to keep those two things in mind simultaneously, if at all possible, at all times. So moving on to this next article here, SER has published several articles post Gareth Gore's meeting with Pope Leo, at which Gareth Gore told Pope Leo all of these different facts and pieces of information that he's learned over the course of his research for writing his book Opus. And SER talked to Gareth Gore after the fact, and I read that in a previous video, his article and his take on everything. And this is another article that I thought was worth including in this mini series because it deals with the exact same theme of the abuse of psychiatric medicine, and also the situation where apparently, at least in the country of Spain, allegedly members of this organization are being sent to an Opus Dei hospital, to a very specific floor on this Opus Dei hospital, the fourth floor, as it were, where things are happening to them that are most definitely and assuredly a violation of medical ethics, if it is true. Do you need to get down? Do you want to get down? That's my co-star, my dog. So anyway, I wanted to read this article because they include some good information. The headline says, and I've translated this from its original Spanish to English, so bear with me if the translation isn't flawless. A former member of Opus Dei, quote, "I was amazed by the tons of medication and how strong it was, tremendously debilitating." A former Opus Dei official and former numerary member denounced on SER radio the abuses committed by the ultra-conservative Catholic organization at the University Clinic of Navarra. Quote, "They really medicated me a lot there." So this was written by Laura Gutierrez, published on May 5th of 2026. And sometimes, for whatever reason with this article, it doesn't like, or this website doesn't like translating, so sometimes it pops back to the Spanish. So if there's like a weird pause or drop, I'm just like trying to get it retranslated back so I can finish reading. So Juan, this is a pseudonym, was a numerary member of Opus Dei in Spain for over 40 years. He held positions of high responsibility within the order, and in addition to working as a teacher at an Opus Dei school in Navarre, he was the director of a center for numeraries. He left almost 10 years ago after a mental process that led him to understand that he had been trapped by what Juan defines as a cult. Quote, "I realized that I was giving advice to people that was extremely harmful. It was about erasing their identity, leading them down the wrong path, and normalized it without knowing it was false," Juan recalls. "It was during that process that I began to consider that Opus Dei was a place with cult-like characteristics, and I decided to leave because it was truly very harmful to a person and their mental health," he explains. You want to come back up? Come on. During the years Juan was a numerary member of Opus Dei, he accompanied numerous members of the organization experiencing depressive symptoms to seek treatment from doctors of the order at the University Clinic of Navarra. Quote, "People came mainly from Spain, but also from other parts of the world, from Latin America, to be seen here," says Juan, who explains that all cases of numeraries experiencing spiritual crisis or burnout, quote, "weren't resolved through a normal process like taking a break, but rather were channeled through the clinic. There was a team of doctors, men and women, all from Opus Dei and cut from the same cloth, people who acted in support of the institution," he recounts. Many people were also referred by Opus Dei psychiatrists in cities with a high concentration of numeraries, such as Valencia, Murcia, or Seville, where there were branches on the fourth floor of the university clinic, notes this former numerary. In all those visits, Juan witnessed firsthand, as he told SER, the pharmacological treatments these people received. "I was astonished when I accompanied these people through the tons of medication they took because of how strong it was. It was incredibly debilitating, he says. Years later, Juan recounts he consulted with some doctors about the potency of these drugs. They told me they were used to sedate animals and that the doses given to a person completely incapacitated them, he says, recalling that the type of consultation at the clinic was very strange. It wasn't about trying to resolve the person's underlying problem, which might have been related to a life crisis or exhaustion, but rather about calming them down or bringing them back into the fold of the institution. And medication was always used. And if medication is always being used, I think it may be appropriate to take a pause and ask whether or not that is appropriate. The fourth floor of this clinic, these former members of Opus Dei explain, is where consultations were held and patients were admitted for mental health treatment. That's where Carmen Charo, who joined Opus Dei at just 15 years old, ended up. Another story about somebody who joined Opus Dei as an underage individual, despite the fact that Opus Dei continues to say that that's apparently impossible to do. It keeps happening. It's very strange. She moved to several cities until she was appointed director of a girls' university residence in Valencia. I said no 1,000 times because I didn't feel capable, because I never really felt comfortable within the work, but they gradually convince you that it's God's calling, and then a few months after taking on that responsibility, I broke down, Carmen recounts. She began having nightmares day and night. They were major anxiety attacks that I now recognize as a life crisis because you're constantly banging your head against a wall because nothing anyone tells you, nothing you experience makes sense. This went on for a couple of years until she was referred to the clinic in Navarra for the first time. They medicated me. I was taking 3 pills a day, she recalls, but it wasn't enough, and sometime later she ended up admitted to the 4th floor of this hospital. Carmen is convinced she was admitted because she exploded in the consultation room, furious about everything she was going through. Those 2 days turned into 2 months. It was partly about calming me down and getting me back on track with my vocation and obedience, Carmen remembers. Not about helping her recuperate, not about helping her relax, not about helping her to take a step back and take a break from responsibilities that had been foisted upon her, even after she insisted that they were too much. No, what was it about? It was about getting her back on track with her vocation, quote unquote, and obedience. Obedience to who? To Opus Dei. They really medicated me a lot there, at least at night, she recounts. After dinner, we'd sometimes meet with another numerary member, and we couldn't remember how we got back to our rooms, how we went to sleep. That's intense. The control, Carmen explains, was total. Imagine what you could do to a person, what has been done to people under that kind of like a suggestive and vulnerable mindset. No mention either, by the way, if whether or not these visits that they would have with this other numerary member, whether or not this person was a pharmacologist, whether they were a doctor, a nurse practitioner, EMS, anything, nothing, just some numerary member. And that in and of itself reminds me of the many cases I've heard from former members about their experiences being in these Opus Dei centers where allegedly blank scripts like that were pre-signed but were blank were just like left in the director's office for the director to then like fill out and then like dispense medication to members like as they saw fit. And these people are not medical doctors. They're just Opus Dei directors of centers with blank scripts signed by doctors, Opus Dei doctors, and they're just handing these pills out to anybody. And now you're hearing about people who are saying that they can't remember after they took those pills how they got back to their rooms or how they went to sleep. Carmen, who didn't see her family for 15 years, remembers how she was always accompanied to appointments by another member of the order. Juan corroborates this. Quote, I never saw anyone who came with a family member. In fact, Juan explains that as the accompanying person, he found out about the medications the patient had to take before the patient did. I even called the director of the house where that person came from to tell him what the doctor had told us, he explains. They were consultations between Opus Dei members, and that patient was the last person who mattered in that process. Now, I don't know a whole lot about like HIPAA, for example, or the various laws that exist in other countries that are supposed to protect that doctor-patient confidentiality relationship. But I feel almost certainly that this type of like insertion between very intentional between an individual and the medical personnel responsible for giving them their care, that's got to be a violation of some kind of like ethical or procedural like guideline or policy or law of some sort. Like, it just seems absolutely insane to me that this kind of thing would be able to exist and continue to happen. But like all of these people, like, this is a closed system. It's Opus Dei people going to Opus Dei doctors who are discussing their care with other Opus Dei members. Like, it's a completely closed system. There's like very little opportunity, I think, for outside accountability. And I have to think that's probably by design, right? I really do not believe that, like, you don't do this kind of thing accidentally. Like, this doesn't just sort of happen because, like, you weren't thinking clearly when you were, like, creating your organization's, like, policies and guidelines. This is very, very intentional. According to these former members of the organization, seeking help outside the Opus Dei network is also difficult. Oh, what did I just say? For example, going to a health center or any hospital. Quote, once you're inside, they don't allow it, among many other things, because you don't have a single penny, says Carmen, who claims she never saw a single cent of her salary. Oh, wow. There's another element, tale as old as time, with this organization. Somebody not having access to the money that they were supposed to be getting paid or that they were earning through their career. For one, the explanation for this behavior lies in a sectarian attitude. Quote, it's the result of a brainwashing process in which they gradually sever all your ties with the real world, suppressing any initiative or action you might take. The only thing you could do as a member of Opus Dei was to use the resources provided by Opus Dei. Anything else was considered evil, going against what the founder said, the logic of a cult. According to Juan, the organization trains soldiers, people who suppress everything that makes them different, and creates people who lack the tools to deal with these issues. And sadly, that is something that I have heard from other former members, men in particular, former male members who have talked about this, like, you're in the army now kind of attitude about being in Opus Dei, in the sense that, like, the organization owns you, mind, body, and soul. You have no will and no trajectory independent or separate from this organization and what they intend to do with you. And, that would be fine, perhaps, if the people who were becoming involved exercised the informed consent and knew that that was the situation that they were getting themselves into ahead of time. Like, I served nearly 10 years active duty military service, but I knew ahead of time when I signed my contract exactly what I was getting myself into. I knew that the federal government, and at that point, the Department of Defense, was going to own me, mind, body, and soul. I consented to that fully. I was aware of what that meant. And I was more than fairly compensated. I made decent money while I was in the military, and all of that money was mine, and I got to keep it and do with it what I wanted. So not exactly the same situation here at all. And I think it's pretty rich of Opus Dei to demand that degree of loyalty and allegiance without offering anything in return, right? I may deal with like physical and mental issues for the rest of my life because of my experience in the military, but I have access to care, I have access to resources, I have the Department of Veterans Affairs that I can turn to if I need something, I have the DAV like, there are so many different resources for somebody who comes out through that rigorous kind of an environment that doesn't exist in this case with Opus Dei, yet they have no problem demanding that of people and then acting like it's an affront and an offense if that's questioned or looked at kind of askew. The abuse practices described by these former members of the order occurred, according to their testimony, between 1980 and 2012. Hardly ancient history, well within the timeline of recorded human history. It's within most of our lifetimes. I'm going to guess. This former numerary is convinced that they've seen the writing on the wall and have reversed course on some issues. They say that today it's no longer done as much at the university clinic. Rather, milder cases tend to be treated in the people's hometowns. We can certainly hope that that is the case. We have no way of knowing. I have no way of knowing because I'm not a member myself and don't have access to this information and everything. So I have to take what Juan is saying. But we would certainly hope that after all of this time, this organization could see fit to change some of the ways that they are conducting their business. Journalist Gareth Gore, author of Opus, presented some of these testimonies to Pope Leo a few weeks ago during a meeting at the Vatican. As reported by SER, the Pope, according to Gore, promised to examine all of the evidence and launch an investigation. Well, you can go back to my last video. I read this article that they are hyperlinking to here, and yes, there was definitely a conversation that took place, and yes, the Pope was definitely told some things that he should act on, but he never promised. According to SER's reporting in that article, he never promised to launch an investigation. He promised to think deeply about it and consider all of the different elements, and that was essentially it. But people are taking that as a promise to launch an investigation. So we'll see. The University Clinic of Navarra, in a statement, rejects the accusations of malpractice. Quote, to claim that patients are medicated at this institution with the aim of incapacitating them is an extremely serious accusation because it attacks the honor of its professionals and professional ethics, the statement asserts, explaining that pharmacological prescriptions are always based on clinical, diagnostic, and therapeutic criteria in accordance with international medical practice guidelines. Well, that is definitely the correct PR statement to release. But I also think that it's interesting here that they say they reject the claim that patients are medicated with the aim of incapacitating them. Well, is that the claim that's being made? That Opus Dei is trying to incapacitate people? No. Actually, based on what we've been reading and what people have been saying, that's not the issue that is at stake here. The issue that is at stake is that people in Opus Dei are using psychiatric medicine and whatever else to control and coerce obedience out of people, which is that's not incapacitation, is it? That's like malleable consent, basically. You're like forcing consent from a person at that point. So I do think that is a little bit interesting. University Clinic of Navarra, nobody is saying that you're incapacitating people. The claim is that it's being used to control and manipulate people, which is kind of different. No? Just thought I'd point that out. So lastly, we are going to look at a couple of articles that were published on Opus Libris. I've been trying to pull more from Opus Libris here recently because if you don't know, this is a website that was launched by a former member named Augustina, and it's been around for decades, and it's an incredible archive of people's experiences and stories and testimonies stretching back like decades and decades. I think this website launched like shortly after like Y2K. So it's got a lot of information, and I've been trying to go through and pull more stories and read more people's experiences because I think it is such a valuable and frankly underutilized resource. And so throughout this last little mini series that I've been doing about Opus Dei and APM, I've been reading you stories and articles that people have self-published on Opus Libris. And here are two that I want to include for this, our final segment. So this article here was published on February 25th, 2019, so very relatively recently. And I feel like this is a good, not a rebuttal necessarily to the statement of the University Clinic of Navarra, but perhaps it adds some context and some nuance to a situation that I think is honestly much more complex and nuanced than Opus Dei or the University Clinic of Navarra want to acknowledge. And as I go into this and read this, bear in mind that according to the University Clinic of Navarra. These sort of coercive practices, the use of psychiatric medicine to coerce obedience and the allegiance to a vocation within this organization. Keep in mind what this person is saying, what they said in their response. I think it provides some interesting context. So this person wrote, in response to Eileen's email, and they hyperlink to that, I would like to inform you about the drugs currently used. Now, this was in 2019. The SER article that I read is from just a couple of months ago, in the year of 2026. It is not completely outside the possibility to think that things have changed, but then also at the same time, you know, in my opinion, in my view, it seems like this organization struggles to change much or very quickly at all. So we can hope and pray that what this individual shares in this experience is no longer true, and we can hope and pray that this organization is doing things better. But also, I think, given what this organization has been accused of and is being investigated for and has been convicted of in the past, it's worth taking what people are saying into consideration. So they say treatment usually begins with Erasmus, whose active ingredient is sertraline, indicated for major depression. The dosage varies depending on the severity of the depression. 1 to 3 pills are taken daily. If you continue to rebel, they add Topamax, prescribed for epileptics. This drug causes difficulty thinking, decreases your level of consciousness, and makes you feel drowsy and lethargic. The side effects can cause serious damage to the kidneys, liver, and eyes. If the 2 previous medications at very high doses are not sufficient, the third is Orfadol, whose active ingredient is lorazepam. It has addictive effects and causes drowsiness. This progressive cocktail is prescribed by a senior psychiatrist. It can last more than 10 years. This psychiatrist, in theory, should be your doctor, but when you question aspects of the individuals in your delegation, they defend them to the death, ridiculing and belittling your opinion. The doctor confuses, distorts, and violates the code of ethics for a physician. If psychotic episodes occur as a result of taking these drugs, for example, undressing in the street, you are admitted to the 4th floor of the CUN, the University Clinic of Navarra, where you remain for a period during which you are unaware of the time dimension or the other drugs that may be injected into you. As soon as symptoms of hypnosis appear, you are returned to your original center or another one. Most frequently, this results in the onset of other psychotic episodes. I can answer and explain all of these details because I have experienced them personally. Signed, M.A.T. So, 2019, not terribly long ago. It gives me cause to wonder, have things really changed? We really have no way of knowing unless we can talk to someone who's on the inside, and then it's very difficult to trust the information that Opus Dei releases because they do have a track record of being a bit obtuse and for obfuscating reality a bit. And so it is difficult to know how things have changed. But even if things have changed, and we sincerely hope that they have, it is just a simple matter of fact that for a number of years, people are reporting having these types of experiences, really negative experiences, and the impacts that that's had on their life long term are very, very real and are still impacting them if they are still alive today. And so I think that there is some care and some attention that should be paid to people who have been harmed in the past, even if everything is on the up and up now and a new and better way forward is being found. It's vitally important to recognize the experiences and of people and the harms that have been committed in the past. It's an important part of moving forward. So this final article was published just last year, I think February 19th, and it's what we're going to conclude with, and I think it rounds kind of this entire conversation out in a really good way, because it is important to remember that this APM thing that allegedly exists within Opus Dei is part of a larger and overarching like system or ecosystem that it seems to exist within this organization that has a myriad of impacts on people's lives depending on just the person and who they are and where they are. The impacts are innumerable. Not all are negative, but many apparently are. And this APM is a part of that whole. So this final article is titled The Heroic Minute. I cried when I saw it too. Submitted by somebody with the username Turbot. I am 67 years old and was a numerary member of the order from 1971 to 1991. I am married and have 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren. I am a scientist. I have seen the documentary twice, referring to the Heroic Minute. I will watch it again. Each viewing is like another layer of lasagna added to those 20 years of my life. I was astonished because I didn't remember scenes I had seen the day before or 2 days prior. That surprises me even more because of my professional training makes me very attentive to detail. One possible explanation could be that each sentence generated a shock in my mind that left me stunned for a while, perhaps suspending my attention as I recalled things that had happened to me in exactly the same way as what was being narrated. What they are describing to me, I'm not a mental health professional, but that sure sounds a lot to me like a flashback, which is a pretty common occurrence for people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder after being through a really, really traumatic experience. Hearing something that just like immediately sort of sends you back in time, and like you are back in that moment experiencing whatever it is that that external stimuli triggered. It can be incredibly disruptive. And it is a very common part of dealing with PTSD. And I think it's worth acknowledging that this person, this former member of this organization that apparently there's nothing wrong with, according to them, was trying to watch a documentary about the organization in which they spent 20 years and had difficulty getting through it because it was giving them flashbacks. I watched it with my wife. She was surprised that I kept anticipating what the numeraries were going to say, almost using the exact same words. I'd say a sentence, and then one of them would say something very similar. It happened especially with those who had been inside the organization longer. The first chapter froze me inside. I was numb. The second, specifically the part about asking the center's secretary for money, broke me. It broke me because some secretary scolded me for spending 200 pesetas, which is a little over €1 or like $1 in a week, not just once, but several times. It was as if you were a spendthrift. Asking for money more than once was considered a crime, a serious crime. It was frightening. Why did I have to ask permission to buy toothpaste? If they hadn't abducted a 13-year-old boy, this wouldn't have happened. My father wasn't to blame at all. He fought as hard as he could to get me out of there, but he was the enemy of my vocation and cooperated with the devil. Once again, another story about somebody who got sucked into this organization when they were underage. Opus Dei says it's impossible. Seems like it happened an awful lot. In the next 2 chapters, my eyes filled with tears and I got a lump in my throat. The second time I watched it, the same thing happened. My wife told me that I had always maintained that in Opus Dei, the worst treated were the women, and especially the auxiliary numeraries. I saw the table as infinitely sadistic. I found it hard to accept sleeping on the floor once a week. I couldn't understand how they could sleep every day. I understand that they might have disapproved of us not saying thank you, but we didn't because we couldn't talk about them or even to them. It was forbidden. There was restricted communication between the director and the director via the intercom with 2 connecting doors, each with its own key and 2 people on each side to open and close them. This is something that I have heard many former members talk about when I interviewed former assistant numerary Anne-Marie Allen about her book Serve and her experience being in Opus Dei in Ireland as an underage child initially. This was something that she talked about, this double locking mechanism and the complexity and the like extent to which they went to secure these doors to just keep people apart so that they like couldn't communicate. And she said that she went on to have a career in the like Irish prison system. And she said even in the prison system, she did not see locking mechanisms this complex as what was maintained within Opus Dei. And now here more recently, we have an example of it being like upgraded to the 21st century because the Daily Mail back a couple of months ago released an investigative like undercover story that journalist Jordana Seal released after she went undercover pretending to be a young woman interested in Opus Dei in the UK. And she went to an Opus Dei center called Lakefield. And throughout the article, there were pictures. She talked about this in her report, how at least one of the doors, and it very well could be like the main entrance and exit point for this center, had a biometric reader over top of the like doorknob, so that if you wanted to enter, you had to have like your biometric information in the system and approved in order to be able to enter. And I wondered, because of the fact that we have so many stories about this like double locking mechanism that's existed within Opus Dei for so long, I wondered, does that biometric scanner exist on the other side of that door? Do you have to be able to scan your thumb in order to open the door and leave? My wife kept asking me how I managed not to see them when they were being served in the dining room. Very simple, quote, by protecting your eyesight. She'd ask, and how do you do that? The answer was by unfocusing your gaze, looking at the person in front of you or at what you were serving yourself from the tray. I was so engrossed in the documentary that when I went to sleep, I realized I couldn't remember the names of the numeraries who appeared even on the second viewing. I still couldn't recall them. I was inside the documentary, reliving the past. I'm still in shock. This documentary should be required viewing for parents who send their children to Opus Dei schools or Fomento, whatever, or to clubs where they have a great time until they're confronted with the vocation crisis. Thank you so much for speaking up for all of us. Thank you so much because thanks to you, I was able to write down my memories and they are amazing. Thank you so much, Augustina. Thank you so much to those who write most often. Because of my doubts about how I managed to leave, how did I get the money, I called a key person in my escape who helped me with a bank transaction I'd forgotten about. This facilitated my transition to freedom. There were 3 people who played a crucial role in my departure, and I didn't remember them until I watched the documentary for the second time. That person no longer lives in Spain, but he perfectly remembered everything we did 30 years ago to ensure my salary went into my account and not the joint account I shared with 2 other Opus Dei members. That account could only be accessed with 2 signatures. I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. The whole package deal came with it: a visit to the 4th floor of the University of Navarra for psychiatry, a letter to the father, the dispensation request, and waiting for the letter with the dispensation, a letter I never saw, all while enduring disrespect, shouting, and threats of eternal damnation from the director who handled the operation. So much for Christian charity. The documentary not only revived my memories, but also made me search through my things for those things I would want to throw away but don't. I even found my Lux Index planner. I found extremely interesting papers from that time in my life that I didn't remember and that confirmed the importance that, for Opus Dei, those who work outside of the organization have. Is it good to remember? Yes. Sending you a big hug and take care of yourselves. Turbat. So that is where I am going to conclude things. I think that the stories that I have shared, the articles that I have read, all serve to illustrate a situation that is just incredibly disturbing and disordered. And of course, all parties are innocent and presumed innocent until proven guilty. But at this point, I think that there is more than enough circumstantial evidence to warrant a very, very hard look at this organization. And people have been saying that for years. And I think it desperately needs to happen. One thing that I want to emphasize from Turbat's story that he shared here was how simply listening to the experiences of other people, watching this documentary and hearing some of the terminology and the language that he had existed and lived with for 20 years helped to sort of uncork the memory hole and allow him to access memories and experiences that he completely shut out or forgotten about over time, because it's a very normal thing for the human brain to do, to kind of like try to compartmentalize traumatic events so that we can move on with our life and try to live a life that is in some way, shape, or form whole and complete, even though it can be incredibly difficult to do that after a situation like this. And so it illustrates how incredibly important it is to tell these stories, even if these situations that these people experienced are no longer in existence, even if it's a brave new world within Opus Dei, as Opus Dei expects us all to believe. It is still very, very important to talk about these situations, to hear these stories, to amplify these experiences, because of the fact that there are so many people. And an article that I read in the last video, Gareth Gore said that he estimates the number of victims of Opus Dei to be like in the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. There are still people who are working through and need to work through the experiences that they had while they were in this organization. And for so many people, that doesn't happen until something triggers it. And for many, many people, it's hearing about similar experiences or seeing something like the Heroic Minute that takes them back and allows them to access those memories from hopefully a safe and secure place. It's incredibly important, and it's an incredibly important part of the healing process, and also of, like I said, ensuring that we all understand the situation and the circumstances that allowed these harms and abuses to occur for so long, so that we can prevent them happening in the future. That is my number one goal, to create awareness and to prevent more harm in the future. So thank you so much for giving me your time and attention. You'll have to let me know what you think about this mini series about APM in Opus Dei. If you are someone who's had an experience with this type of thing, by all means, feel free to leave a comment. I have been going through and reading my comments and making vertical videos like on Instagram or TikTok or wherever. You should follow me there, link down below, to respond to some of these questions that people leave. And I've really, really enjoyed doing that. It's given me a chance to clarify certain aspects of my work and research, and also to point out some things that I have just noticed over time. So if you have an experience or just a thought about this entire thing, please let me know down in the comments below. I always check my comments section. Please do give this a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Details to connect with me, learn more about my work, support my endeavors, all linked down below. Like I said, please follow me on social media. If you are at all interested, I spend a lot of time on Instagram and TikTok specifically, and that is where I also talk about other issues that are not necessarily directly related to like Opus Dei or religious control or the Catholic Church. It's kind of where I will also talk about other issues that are interesting to me or concerning to me, or situations that I'm following or whatever. So follow me there. That would be cool. And you can check out some of my other work over on the content. If you feel like hanging around, go check out those other 2 videos about APM. And hopefully I will have a new video for you very, very soon. But in the meantime, just remember, nolite te bastardes carbonorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.